In this session, we will use wave dynamics in a bit more advanced method to do some analysis. So in an earlier session, we had set up wave dynamics where we reserved ports, set up a pair of clients, and then set up traffic. And we're running traffic at 38,000 packets a second at 1518 byte frames. Now this is an 802.11 AC 3-spatial stream Netgear access point that we are testing here. So we're seeing 461 megabits of forwarding rate, which is low. We should be seeing much, much higher than that. So the first question is, why isn't the downstream throughput or forwarding rate higher? Well, let's take a look at that. So here we have basic traffic per port being displayed, right? And so we can see that we are not receiving many errored frames. So while in an earlier session we looked at wave analyze, remember we had wave analyze up, we saw that the EVM is outside of spec. It is still good enough that when we're directly connected to between the access point and our wave blade, and with the wave blade being very, very clean EVM, so we can see that we're able to receive the frames just fine. Well, the first thing one would do is go back over to System and right-click or use the Action button. And remember that our card is recording every frame transmitted and every frame received continuously. So it's very easy to clear the capture and then quickly select again and download and view the capture. And when I say quickly, when you get to the place where you are running 900 megabits a second, the packet buffer fills up pretty quickly. And what you're really wanting to do is just get a snippet of information so you can see what's going on as that access point is transmitting. So we'll clear the capture, download and view the capture, and to make things shorter, I've already done that. And here is the Wireshark that comes up as a result of getting a packet capture out of Wave Dynamics. So Wave Dynamics has got a very effective way of setting up a steady state flow, then going and getting a packet capture from that Wi-Fi or the Ethernet card. But we can see that if we look at what is being transmitted here we have the WLAN sequence numbers, we have the VariWave sequence numbers. We can see that its transmit power as it comes into the card is -20. And we can see that the size of the AMPDUs being created is not all that large, right? And we can also see there's a RTS and then a CTS. And then here is a single frame being sent out, which is pretty wasteful. And that's being sent as a single it's an AMPDU of a single MPDU. Then here is an AMPDU, but notice we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So rather than sending 64 MPDUs per AMPDU, they're sending a third of that and then waiting for a block ACK, then sending another short AMPDU, and notice sending that with minimum interframe spacing. And then there's another random back off, an RTS CTS, a single frame, a relatively short AMPDU, a shorter AMPDU, an RTS CTS. So you can see here we didn't need to capture minutes of data. Given that we have the access point in a steady state of running traffic, we can see what's happening in a repeated way. So the reason that the throughput is not higher is that the access point is simply not forwarding all the frames it can because it's not creating AMPDUs that are as large as the spec allows, and not using AMSDUs within AMPDUs either. So that's what's happening here. We see that the phi rate is at where it needs to be. It's MCS 9, short guard interval, right? So it's not an RF problem. It's not a rate adaptation issue. As we scroll through, we see it's very stable in what frames it is sending. It's just not sending that many of them. So right off the bat, if we had run ourselves a throughput test and got throughput numbers that were not as high as expected, you could either have gone to a frame loss test and pulled this packet capture up, or if now someone is wanting to make adjustments to their access point and do diagnostics as they go, we can use WaveDynamix to set up that steady state situation, do the packet capture, and see what's going on here. Now I'm going to use WaveDynamix to do yet another thing. Notice we are running all downstream traffic at this point. All right, so I'm going to go over to the traffic page and I'm going to press the stop button, stop all traffic. So I could either go to the action button and stop the flow group, or I could right click and stop the flow group, or if I hit the stop button up here, it stops all the flow groups. So I'm going to stop that flow group. I'm going to create an upstream flow group. So up, and that will need the Wi-Fi client group talking through to the Ethernet group. And we'll go 15, 18 byte frames. And let's see what we get in the opposite direction. So now if I start that flow group, it ARPs and talks through. So now we notice that the transmit frames per second are 35,000 packets a second. Now we've asked the card to push 50,000 packets a second, but the ACK rate will define how quickly we can send our next packets, right? So if we go and do a packet capture, we'll see we're sending nice long AMPDUs, and what the access point is most likely doing is failing to acknowledge every once in a while, and that's throttling us. So let me remake. If I go to measurements, flow-based, notice now I have two flows that I can select. I'm going to select both of them and look at offered load and forwarding rate. Oh, I'm sorry, I did a chart. What I meant to do was flow-based, up, down, chart, offered load, forwarding rate. Now I've got that same graph back again, but I have both of the flows graphed. So now I can see what's going on here. And these ought to match. I could go do a packet capture. Let's do that, and it'll take a moment for that to come up. But what I'm going to be able to do here, because I am looking at the statistics at the front panel of the product, right? I am seeing the failed ACK rate here to be extremely high. Now, as it's downloading that packet capture, it freezes the statistics, so we'll give it just a second to go ahead and get that. But what I'm going to end up doing here is going over into the client page, and I'm going to change the transmit power from the WaveBlade into the access point. And this is an extremely effective way of doing the RF measurements of how well does the card, what is its receiver sensitivity. So now here is that packet capture. You can see now, here's an ACK from the access point. Here is our WaveBlade doing random backoff. Here's our WaveBlade creating a maximum length AMPDU, right? So from frame 117, 64 frames later would mean it would be number 180. There it is. And here is the access point. We expand. So the access point, you can see what it's doing here is it is not acknowledging all of these frames, right? Make sure we keep an eye on the WLAN sequence number. So this just act starting sequence number 1141. It is acknowledging from 1141 up through 1204, but we sent 1204, right? So it just said it didn't receive all of these. So of course these become retransmissions. So up through 1204 gets retransmitted. So what we're seeing here is the access point is not able to consume all the frames per second that we're sending it, and it's forcing us to resend many frames over and over. Here you notice there's a long interframe gap that just popped up here. So we got up through 1236, and notice the WLAN sequence number drops back to 1173 with a long interframe gap in between. That is a missed ACK. So right there between line 194 and 195, the access point should have sent a block ACK there. It didn't. So now the Waveblade will resend everything that was in the last AMPDU. And then here's the AP sending out that block ACK. It acknowledged it. And we'll notice that it said, okay, I got everything. So starting with 1173, I acknowledged all 64 frames, and that allows us to move forward. But you can see that the access point is not able to keep up with the Waveblade at all. So if we go back into WaveDynamix, we'll see that there's a very high failed ACK rate, right? We are counting those frames that have not been acknowledged, right? So the forwarding rate ends up being around 430 megabits, but that's not throughput because there's a great deal of retransmission. So let's dial the number down here and see if we can get to the place where the failed ACK rate drops. All right, at 20,000 packets a second, we got the failed ACK rate to come down to 23 frames per second. We'll try 10,000 frames a second. Okay, so there's just no getting away from a failed ACK rate. We're going to have some. So let's stay at 20,000 frames a second, and we notice that the failed ACK rate is around 40 frames a second, somewhere between 20 and 40 frames a second. Okay, so we're in a very steady state situation. Now, remembering that what WaveDynamix is doing is under the client definition, we told the application what phi rate we want to be transmitting at. So we're going to transmit every one of our data frames at that MCS9 3 spatial stream short guard interval. There will be no rate adaptation. So now it becomes very simple for us to do a receiver sensitivity test at rate with a given phi rate. All we need to do is go back over here to the client page and start decreasing the transmit power until we see the failed ACK rate start to climb. So let's go in 3 dB steps. That's half power. So there's -9, -12. And we're just keeping an eye then on this failed ACK rate down here. -15. -18, -21. And remember, we have a 30 dB attenuator, so what power is actually reaching the access point is -51 at this point. -24. There we go. So at -24, notice the failed ACK rate climbed. So we'll zero in here, -23, -22, -21. So there's the knee of the curve. So -23 is when we see the failed ACK rate begin to climb. So what we just determined is what the receiver sensitivity of this access point is when we are transmitting -53. The signal power at the access point is -23 plus 30 dB of attenuation. So we have signal power of -53 dB at the input for a fixed phi rate. So now we know the receiver sensitivity of this device at that phi rate, and there's no rate adaptation going on at all, so it's not confusing to figure out what the performance is. Now let's take a look at the spec. We actually have a chart here that we've created. So for MCS 9, right, that's 256 QAM. For 80 megahertz, the minimum sensitivity is minus 51 dBm. That's straight out of the spec, and you can go to the spec and find all this. So we know that the minimum sensitivity that the access point should be should be capable of for MCS 9 is minus 51 dBm. And as you drop to lower and lower MCS rates, the sensitivity should increase, go to a higher negative number. So minus 51, and we just figured here that the transmitter at minus 53 is where the receiver sensitivity. So the receiver sensitivity while running traffic meets the IEEE spec. So if you were evaluating this access point either as a supplier of the access point or as a consumer of the access point, now you have a very effective way to measure the receiver sensitivity at known condition. What I would say here is the access point is working well from a receiver sensitivity point of view. We saw in the Wave Analyze section that the EVM is a bit above spec, so its transmitter is not to spec. But when we look at the throughput forwarding rate on this access point, it does not move as many packets through as what we would expect. We're somewhere in the 240 megabits upstream before it starts failing ACKs, which is going to fill the air with retries. And in the downstream direction, we saw that we never got into the 500 megabit range, even though this should be a 900 megabit device. So that is a little bit more advanced use of WaveDynamix. The last thing that I'll mention here around WaveDynamix, and I won't demonstrate it, but I will mention it, is that if you have an Ethernet port, which we do, right under system, we have an Ethernet port, and you want to run a test to an actual client device, you can put Wave Agent onto the actual client device and use this application to set up a flow out to an agent. So just as here we have the Ethernet client talking to the Wi-Fi client. So we have an Ethernet client, and when we set up traffic, we set up Ethernet traffic to Wi-Fi client, right? So we can do an Ethernet to Wi-Fi. Rather than using a Wi-Fi wave blade, you could put a wave agent in an actual device, a laptop or something of that nature. Turn on that wave agent, and if you know the IP address of the wave agent, you can go to the agents page. You can create an agent manager on the Ethernet card, right? And then you can scan for wave agents. You can then send VeriWave traffic from the Ethernet card to a wave agent. And the way you do that, I'm going to stop the traffic here. Let's just call it flow group 3. If the source is Ethernet, you have to specify a specific client, and in this case it would be ETH01, and then the destination would become a wave agent. And if we had discovered a wave agent, that would show up here. So now you can drive traffic downstream or upstream, Ethernet to the wave agent or wave agent to the Ethernet, and you can be doing testing directly to a wave agent. You could set up an environment where you have an over-the-air test to a wave blade through an access point, where you're running background traffic of your control, and then add a wave agent to that kind of test. So WaveDynamix gives you great ability to create a steady state situation of your choosing, take things one step at a time, change traffic level, change power level, add agents, add more clients after other traffic is running, add more flows after traffic is running, and it even gives you the ability under sequences to create your own custom connection sequence. You go from idle to some state that you would like. Once that's done, you can then have this application send out a series of custom frames. So if you're diagnosing a connection problem and you want the connection process to be somehow personalized so that you can diagnose things, you can create a connection sequence of your own in order to diagnose those problems. Remember that you always have either on an Ethernet card or on a Wi-Fi card the ability to go out and get the packet capture immediately. So a great deal of analysis can be done with this tool.